It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single person in possession of a television or streaming service must be in want of a stellar Pride and Prejudice adaptation. You could say that I'm a casual fan of Pride and Prejudice. That's not Colin Firth's Mr. Darcy behind me, I don't know what you're talking about. And if you follow me on social media, then you might have seen me working on a sequel Pride and Prejudice play called Miss Bennet, Christmas at Pemberley. Here I am doing the lighting for the play. Oh, there's me doing the sound. Oh, there's me dressed as a footman, ready to go on stage, and there I am eating dinner, and that shouldn't be in there. So I've been reminiscing on my deep love for Pride and Prejudice. Totally not a phase I went through when I was 17. What are you talking about? And I'm pretty sure I've seen actually a significant amount of the adaptations that have been made, if not almost all of them. According to Wikipedia, there's 2 BBC miniseries/serials I haven't seen. One from 1980 and one from 1967. There's actually quite a few adaptations that are just completely lost, so I'll never be able to watch them. So I have 7 adaptations that I will be ranking from worst to best. So there's a lot of Austen adaptations out there. So I've devised almost a criteria for what makes a Pride and Prejudice adaptation, which is pretty much that it just has to sort of follow the book, follow the storyline, follow the themes. That's basically it. So something like Death Comes to Pemberley doesn't really count because it's a sequel rather than following the book. Similarly, something like Bridget Jones's Diary, even though it's based on Pride and Prejudice, it doesn't necessarily follow the book very closely. It deviates quite significantly from the text. However, I have included Pride and Prejudice and zombies because, yes, while it does actually have zombies in it, it does actually follow the text pretty closely. So it's in my list. Here's the lovely, lovely list of all of the ones that I will be ranking. Let's go. So in number 7 is Pride and Prejudice, a latter-day comedy. I watched this one on YouTube a while ago. It's basically a modern day Mormon adaptation. It's okay. I just found it kind of unmemorable. Didn't really do much for me. It was okay, but it's not my favorite. So number 7 for me. Number 6 is Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. This is probably the most recent adaptation that I can think of. I'm pretty sure there hasn't been any since this one. While it's an very interesting concept, it is quite bizarre. I think the biggest downside is that they kind of do just race through the Pride and Prejudice plot just to get to the interesting zombie stuff. Everything just happens so fast, but then there's a lot of emphasis on that, which I don't know what I expected when I signed up for Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. I guess zombies were on the cards. The ending is kind of a bit cliche, not necessarily like the original ending of Pride and Prejudice, of course. I'm talking about the fact that Wickham is kind of a zombie, and then in the credits he comes back, and it's sets up for a sequel that I hope I don't have to watch, but it's very, very cliche. Perhaps though my favorite part of this film is the first proposal scene, because it's these 2 worlds actually come together, and it makes sense that Darcy and Elizabeth are fighting off against each other. They do a lot of very cool visual things, obviously the stabbing of the heart at the end, the half undressing each other. I get what they were going for there. You know what? It's good. It's very, very funny. I do also like some of the casting in this film, particularly Matt Smith as Mr. Collins. It actually worked really well, and he's very, very funny in this film. Maybe almost too likable, but it kind of worked. He kind of played up the sliminess, but it was good. But yeah, unfortunately, it's still pretty low on this list. Number 5 is the Pride and Prejudice film from 1940. This is the first ever Pride and Prejudice feature film, so for that it kind of deserves its due. I feel growing up with all of the really amazing adaptations from the 90s through to the 2000s, I didn't appreciate it as much as maybe it would have been appreciated, if I'd seen it before I'd seen any of those other adaptations, or if I was alive in the 1940s. One of the things that actually really sticks out about this adaptation compared to some of the other more modern adaptations that are set in time is the costuming. But my understanding about that is that they actually kind of used the Gone with the Wind momentum and the costumes from that film, which was made the previous year, in the Pride and Prejudice film. And so they kind of, I guess, adapted it more to that time period rather than the more traditional Regency era costumes that we see on a lot of these adaptations. I have to say, I do love Greer Garson and Laurence Olivier as Elizabeth and Darcy. I think that's great casting. I think they're a great match. I guess my only critique of that was that I found Laurence Olivier's Darcy's quite nice and quite charming compared to most of the other ones where he's kind of a bit more aloof. Olivier's Darcy wasn't like that. But yeah, I guess the reason why it's sitting so low on this list is purely just because there was a lot of, I guess, deviation from the book. There was a moment when they're doing archery in there, very strange. There was a carriage race, I remember at one point. Lots of odd things, which I guess made sense, for the time that the film was being made, but I guess now it sort of seems a bit strange to me. So yeah, that's my number 5. Sitting at number 4 is Pride and Prejudice. Okay, I love this film. It is so much fun, so much fun. If you haven't seen it, you definitely should. It's like a Bollywood take on Jane Austen, even though I would say that there's still a lot of Western influence in this film. But the story fits really well within the context of an Indian family in the early 2000s who's, trying to marry off their daughters. Aishwarya, I hope I'm saying that right, Aishwarya Rai and Martin Henderson play Lolita, aka Elizabeth Bennet, and Will Darcy respectively, and they are so good. I think they're probably the most attractive of all these couples. I was watching it and I was like, they're both so beautiful. Yeah, so I enjoy this film a lot, and while it takes a lot of liberties, it is just a really fun, light-hearted, modern Indian adaptation. The biggest deviation of the film is the second half of the book, which kind of almost gets summed up in the last half an hour to 20 minutes of the film. The majority of the film does focus on the earlier parts, in particular the Mr. Collins, or in this case, Mr. Colley storyline. Darcy's first proposal happens so late on in the film that it's actually really interesting. By that point, Lolita has already started falling for Darcy, but then changes her mind when she finds out the information about Balraj Bingley being stopped from marrying Jaya, aka Jane in this case, which is definitely very different to what Pride and Prejudice presents. However, it worked really well. I think the biggest problem I had with this one was that the Wickham and Lucky, who is the Lydia of this film, their storyline doesn't carry enough weight to it. Even though it's quite a good build-up, it doesn't feel as intense as the elopements as some of these other films where the stakes are quite high. This one, it didn't necessarily feel as high, but it was still pretty cool. But yeah, other than that, it was a great adaptation, and I highly, highly, highly recommend you go watch it just because it is just so much fun. Okay, we're on to our top 3, and let me just say before we get into this, these are our god tier adaptations. I'm talking amazing, incredible, show-stopping, just brilliant. Regardless of how I order them, just know that I love these so much. They're just amazing. Honestly, this just comes down to personal taste in a way. So sitting at number 3 is perhaps my most controversial pick on this list, and that is 2005's Pride and Prejudice. I know, that iconic film with the sunrise and they're confessing their love to each other, the hand touches, yes, and it's number 3. I'm sorry. No, I'm not. Let's start with what I like about this film, because there are so many things I like, and like I said, god tier. It's amazing. It's iconic. The soundtrack is so good, okay? It is amazing. It is beautiful. It is immersive. It is just so good. You can't go wrong with a beautiful soundtrack like that. It is the best music. I have to give a shout out to the cinematography. There is so much beautiful cinematography in this film. You have all these gorgeous long shots through Longbourn and through the Netherfield Ball. You have that beautiful scene when Lizzie's swinging around on that swing and there's the time changes. So good. And I mean the love confession scene at the end. It's just so beautiful and so cinematic, and that's just what makes this one. It's very cinematic. Nods to the production designers, costume, all of that, because they did a fantastic job. The sculpture gallery at Pemberley that Elizabeth walks through, beautiful. A beautiful interpretation of that scene. Of course, we love the casting. We love Keira Knightley. We love Matthew McFadden. Together, it is pure magic. So well done again to Joe Wright and his casting team. I think the reason why this film sits at number 3 for me is purely personal taste, and it's just because I didn't like how much it condensed the story. And that's, look, ultimately it's a film. It can only go for so long. It cannot go for 6 hours, 10 hours. It did a really good job for the most part. I felt like that Wickham and Elizabeth relationship wasn't really there in the film. Like, there was just little things like that which I wish I could have seen more of. But hey, they did a really good job. So yeah, I can totally see why this is so many people's favorites. And you know what? I get it. I can appreciate it. It is a beautiful film. It deserves the praise that it gets. Honestly, it really does. So this is just my opinion at this point. We're down to our top 2, and guess what? Surprise, it's a tie. So tying in first place is 1995 Pride and Prejudice and the Lizzie Bennet Diaries. I like these two so much, but it just didn't feel quite fair to put them up against each other when they're just both so good. So I'll just start by explaining 1995. Here's the thing, I wasn't even alive in 1995, but 1995 Pride and Prejudice, it was a cultural reset. Darcy diving in the lake, cultural reset. For me, this adaptation is everything I could ever want. I love that this adaptation just follows the storyline so closely. I love that it's a mini-series. I think it works so much better than film adaptations. But yeah, it's my preference. I just really like that it does focus so much on the story. Let's start with the casting, because the casting of this is immaculate. Okay, Sue Birtwistle knew what she was doing when she got Colin Firth for Mr. Darcy. Him as Mr. Darcy, as well as Jennifer Illy as Elizabeth Bennet, is just so good. They have such palpable chemistry. The chemistry is there, the tension is there. They're just so good together. It works so well. Other great casting is, I guess, Julia Sawalha as Lydia, love her Lydia, as well as Alison Steadman as Mrs. Bennet. Her Mrs. Bennet set the bar for me. If the Mrs. Bennet isn't like crazy over the top like she is, like, I don't know why, I love that Mrs. Bennet so much that the other ones that are a lot more like toned down just don't do it for me. The writing is phenomenal. There's just little things that Andrew Davies has put in that kind of just build the story, and it is brilliant. 1995 was my first introduction to Pride and Prejudice, which is probably why I'm so fond of it. It made me fall in love with Pride and Prejudice, and for that, it has a very special place in my heart. So yes, that is why it is one of my 2 top picks on this list. But for me, 1995 is actually tied with the Lizzie Bennet Diaries. Yes, it is tied with that web series from 2012. Let me explain, because it's good in its own way. And the thing is, I couldn't put it next to 1995 and compare, because 1995 is so traditional versus the LBD, which is actually very modern. It's just such a good adaptation, but in a very different way, which is why they're tied. The reason why I love this adaptation so much is because it remains true to Austen's themes. Basically, the LBD takes the original themes and takes it and puts it into our context, into something that we can kind of understand and process in a way that makes sense. The best example I can give is probably the Lydia Wickham storyline. So obviously in the original text, Lydia and Wickham elope because they don't actually get married, and that's quite scandalous. You don't, go off with a man when you're not married, pretty much. Obviously in today's context, that doesn't make sense anymore. People don't necessarily get married to have relationships. However, what the LBD does is it takes what that moment meant in the original text and transform it into what it would mean in today's context. So basically, the reason why that was so bad is because it ruined Lydia's reputation, and then by association ruined her sister's reputation. Instead, what they've done, Bernie Sue, who's the writer, has taken this and basically said, we're going to make it that it's a sex tape of Lydia and Wickham that he then puts out online to try and get money, which is essentially ruining Lydia's reputation. Like, as we know, in a modern day context, leaked sex tapes and nudes and that kind of thing can really ruin lives. It's just so smart. That's not the only thing, because obviously, the book is about these women who are trying to get married because, their property's entailed away from them. Entailment is almost replaced with student loans. And no, they're not necessarily wanting to marry rich, but her mother is obviously still pushing that because I think she's aware of the dire financial situation that is student loans. Similarly, there's a heavy focus on their careers, not just, there's the love stories within there as well, but their career also takes a very important forefront. I think one of the best examples of this is when Lizzie goes to visit Pemberley, it's not necessarily, you know, his house, it's Mr. Darcy's company. It's sort of very career focused and about how these women, you know, they can make their own money. They're not relying necessarily on a marriage, on love to bring in an income. They can do that themselves. I really love the casting of this version as well. Mary-Kate Wiles as Lydia is probably my favorite Lydia ever. Like, so good. She does such a good job of Lydia. It's a much smaller cast because they don't have a lot of like some of those older adults playing a prominent role, but it's just really a clever, intelligent, smart, brilliant, modern adaptation, which is why it is tying with 1995. So there you have it. That is my complete list of my ranking of Pride and Prejudice adaptations. If you agree, comment down below. If you disagree, I'd love to have a discussion. Let's get it going in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Make sure to like this video and subscribe if you're keen to see what I'm gonna be doing next. Yeah, and thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.